All right, in this lesson, we're going to be talking about something kind of unique and different. This is looking at classification by way of evolution. So we just finished talking about evolution. Now we're moving into talking about taxonomy and classification. Well, modern day, we use something called cladistics, which is looking at how things are grouped, but based on their evolutionary history. So taxonomy is actually the science of grouping and naming organisms. So what we've been studying the last few days is really taxonomy. It's about grouping and organizing living things. And so we learned about this 7-level classification system. Of course, now it's 8. This diagram is missing the domain of eukarya for the orcas, the killer whale, orca. This system of organizing everything like this is called taxonomy. There's another term I want you to know, and that's phylogeny. Phylogeny has to do with understanding the relationships between organisms based on their evolutionary heritage. So understanding, for instance, that Tiktaalik was some kind of branch in between amphibians and in between the lungfish and the modern day fish. So looking at this evolutionary pattern is called phylogeny. And so all of these terms kind of have slightly different meanings, but they all have to do with grouping and organizing living things. So what you just saw a minute ago was a phylogenetic tree. So this is a tree, a family tree of organisms based on evolution. So based on phylogeny, based on our understanding of how things are related through evolution, different groups of organisms. Now, understand it just shows relationships. It doesn't show the actual evolutionary history. So sometimes you'll see this organism is related to this one through some ancient ancestor, but it doesn't really show direct paths necessarily. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't have to. So here's an example of a phylogenetic tree. You might start here. They're saying that the protists were the ancient ones, and that some ancient protists branched off and became the sponge. Another branch became these two different animal groups here. Another branch became the flatworms. Another branch became the roundworms and their relatives. And then we had a branch that became echinoderms like the starfish. And another branch became all the chordates, which are, of course, all the ones with the backbone. We had a whole other branch coming over here forming the branch of the mollusks, the segmented worms, the annelids, and the arthropods. So this is an example showing kind of the evolutionary path for animals. And you can see that our closest relatives then in that case, if we're not a chordate, is the echinoderms, the starfish. Now, phylogenetic trees are based on evidence that we take from evolution. The fossil record we already talked about, morphology, which is body form, how the body is put together, the fact that we have, 2 arms, 2 legs. Most animals, that are vertebrate animals, that are chordates, have 4 legs, that kind of thing. That's morphology. We also looked at embryological patterns of development, and that is a piece of evidence that they use to build a phylogenetic tree. And also, of course, DNA, now we use quite a lot, and even protein. But more recently, we've started using this method called cladistics, cladistic analysis or cladograms. In cladistic analysis, we prepare something called a cladogram using a bunch of data, but it is not necessarily trying to build a tree based on all of this other evidence. It's really just looking at something called a derived character. A derived character is a characteristic that is passed along in the evolutionary chain. So it's looking at very specific characteristics. When you build a cladogram, it actually looks kind of like forks in a road. So you'll have a constant line, and then there will be these forks that come off. So it kind of looks like a tree, but less so than the phylogenetic tree I just showed you. Instead, it's more like a common line that's going along, and as time goes by, there are branches that come off of that common line wherever new traits or novel traits that just appeared, pop up. Okay, and those are called derived characters. And those specific traits that we look at in cladistics are used to separate one group from the rest of the groups. Now, cladistics gets its name from the branches on the family tree. So every time there's a little branch that comes off, it's called a clad. And so we call it cladistics, and we call it a cladogram. So a group that branches off is called a clad. So here's what a tree might look like, or a cladogram might look like using cladistics. Here you have the presence of a backbone is where we're starting. So all the animals that have a backbone are here, all of them, because that happened before the branching. Then we had a new trait that came up, a new derived character of hair. That trait is possessed by the horse, the wolf, the leopard, and the house cat, but it's not possessed by the turtle. So the turtle branches off before hair appears. Then we have a new trait, a novel trait, a new derived trait called, that we're saying is being a carnivore, a meat eater. And wolves, leopards, and house cats are all carnivores, but a horse is not. So now the horse branches off. It does not possess that character. Then we keep continuing along, and we have retractable claws. Okay, leopards and house cats have retractable claws, but wolves do not, so the wolf branches off. Finally, the last trait that's on this cladogram is the ability to purr. House cat has it, leopard doesn't, and so the leopard branches off. And this is, you can do this with basically any organisms because we're assuming that all organisms share a common evolutionary heritage, so you can start with any old trait that they all have and branch it off from there and show relationships. So from here, of course, we can say that the leopard and house cat are closer related than the rest of these, and that the wolf is next, the horse is next, and the turtle is distantly related to the house cat on this chart. Now, how you build one of these usually is you have a table of characters. So I don't know how well this is showing up, but usually have a table of different characteristics. In this one, we have presence of hair, we have an amniotic egg, we have 4 walking legs, jaws, and a backbone. Those are the characters we're looking at. And we're comparing a lancelet, a lamprey, a tuna, a salamander, a turtle, and a leopard. So in the chart, you simply go along and say they have it or they don't. If they have it, you put a 1. If they don't, you put a 0. And then you translate this chart into your cladogram. So again, the lancelet doesn't have any of them. The lamprey has a vertebral column, but not any of the rest. So he's the first one to branch off. And so on for all the traits. Now, there are 3 basic assumptions that we use when using cladistics or building a cladogram. The first assumption is that organisms are descended from a common ancestor, and I already mentioned that a minute ago. There's an assumption that they share an evolutionary heritage. The second assumption is that there's going to be a branching pattern, that they're going to branch off from one another. And the third assumption is that change will occur in lineages over time. So these are 3 reasonable assumptions, but they are assumptions that we use in cladistics. So finally, here's just one more example. We're looking here at a whole different variety of organisms and some different traits. We have the amniotic egg. We have openings in the skull for muscles. Crocodiles have them, turtles and amphibians don't. So that's kind of interesting. There was a new branch pattern here. Turtles are different from crocodiles, but crocodiles are more closely related to other lizards and snakes, dinosaurs and birds. Then we have presence of hair, live birth, and then finally a placenta. So you can really use just about any traits that are known and with any organisms because we assume they share a common ancestor. So that's how you make a cladogram, and that's what a cladogram is. These notes should go on page 23, I believe.